Hey, welcome back to Reading with Teachers. So I'm Mrs. Gilbert, so we're going to continue on with Chapter 2 of Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. Chapter 2 is entitled, The Garden of Live Flowers. I could see the garden much better, said Alice to herself, if I could get to the top of that hill. And here's a path that leads straight to it, at least. No, it doesn't do that. It twists more like a corkscrew than a path. Well, this turn goes to the hill, I suppose. No, it doesn't. It goes straight back to the house. Well, then I'll try it the other way. And so she did. She wandered up and down and tried turn after turn, but always came back to the house no matter which way she went. It's no use talking about it, Alice said, looking up at the house as if it were arguing with her. I'm not finished yet. I know if I go into you, I'll have to go through the looking glass again, back into the old room, and that would be the end of all of my adventures. So she turned her back to the house and set out once more down the path, determined to keep straight until she got to the top of the hill. For a few minutes, all went well, and just as she was saying, I really shall do it this time, the path gave a sudden twist and shook itself, and she found herself actually walking back into the door of the house. I never saw a house that kept getting in the way. Never, she cried. However, there was the hill full in sight, and there was nothing to do but start again. This time she came upon a large flower bed with a border of daisies and a willow tree growing in the middle. Oh, tiger lily, said Alice to an orange lily waving in the wind, I wish you could talk. We can talk, said the tiger lily, when there's anybody worth talking to. Alice was so surprised that she could not speak for a moment. The tiger lily only went on waving about, so Alice spoke again, almost in a whisper. Can all the flowers talk? As well as you can, said the tiger lily, and a great deal louder. It isn't good manners for us to begin the conversation, said the pink rose, and I really was wondering when you'd speak. Your face has got some sense, and at least you do have the right pinkish color. I don't care about the color, the tiger lily remarked. If only her petals curled up a little more, she'd be all right. How is it you all can talk? Alice asked. I've been in many gardens before, but none of the flowers could talk. Put your hand down and feel the ground, said the tiger lily. Then you'll know why. Alice did so. It's very hard, she said, but I don't see what that has to do with it. In most gardens, the tiger lily said, they make the beds too soft, so that the flowers are always asleep. This sounded like a good reason. I never thought of that before, Alice said. It's my opinion that you never think at all, said the rose in a rather rude tone. Hold your tongue, cried the tiger lily. Are there more people in the garden beside me? Alice said, ignoring the rose's last remark. There's one other flower in the garden, but she can move around like you, said the rose, but she's more bushy than you are. Is she like me? Alice asked eagerly. Well, she has the same shape as you, the rose said, but she's redder, and her petals are shorter, I think. They're done up close, almost like a dahlia, said the tiger lily, not tumbled about like yours. But that's not your fault, the rose added kindly. You're beginning to fade, so you can't help that your petals are getting a little untidy. Alice didn't like what they were saying about her, so she changed the subject. Does she ever come out here? I'm sure you'll see her soon, said the rose. She's one of the kind that has 9 spikes. Where does she wear them? Alice asked. Why, all around her head, of course, the rose replied. I was wondering why you didn't have some too. She's coming, cried the larkspur. I hear her footstep, thump, thump, along the gravel walk. Alice looked around eagerly and found that it was the Red Queen. She's grown a good deal, she remarked. When Alice first found her in the ashes, she had only been 3 inches high, and here she was, half a head taller than Alice. It's the fresh air that does it, said the rose. "Wonderfully fine air it is out here." "I think I'll go and meet her," said Alice. The flowers were interesting, but she felt that it would be much nicer to have a talk with a real queen. She soon found herself face to face with the Red Queen, and in sight of the hill she had been trying so hard to get to. "Where do you come from?" said the Red Queen. "And where are you going? Look up, speak nicely, and don't twiddle your fingers." Alice followed all these directions and then explained that she had lost her way. "I don't know what you mean by your way," said the Queen. "All the ways here belong to me. But why did you come out here at all?" she added in a kinder tone. "Curtsy while you're thinking about what to say. It saves time." Alice wondered a little at this, but she was too much in awe of the Queen to ask about it. "It's time for you to answer now," the Queen said, looking at her watch. "Open your mouth a little wider when you speak, and always say, 'Your Majesty.'" "I only wanted to see what the garden was like, Your Majesty." "That's perfect," said the Queen, patting her on the head, which Alice didn't like at all. "Though when you say garden, I've seen gardens that would make these look like a field." Alice didn't dare try to argue the point, but went on, "And I thought I'd try to find my way to the top of the hill." "When you say hill," the Queen interrupted, "I could show you hills that would make you call that hill a valley." "A hill can't be a valley, you know," said Alice, surprised that she was arguing with her. That would be nonsense. The Red Queen shook her head. "You may call it nonsense if you like," she said, "but I've heard nonsense that would make that sound as sensible as a dictionary." Alice curtsied again, and they walked in silence until they got to the top of the little hill. Forgot to show you the picture. For some minutes, Alice didn't speak. She looked out in all directions over the country, and what a curious country it was. There were many tiny little brooks running straight across it from side to side. The ground between was divided up into squares by little green hedges. "I declare it looks like a large chessboard," Alice said at last, looking quite delighted. "There ought to be some chessmen moving around somewhere. And there they are!" Her heart began to beat quickly with excitement. "It's a great, huge game of chess that's being played. Oh, how I wish I were one of the players. I wouldn't mind being a pawn if I could join. Though, of course, I would like to be a queen most of all." She glanced rather shyly at the real Queen as she said this. The Queen only smiled pleasantly and said, "That's easily done. You can be the White Queen's pawn, if you like, since Lily's too young to play. You're in the second square to begin with. When you get to the 8th square, you'll be queen." Just at that moment, they began to run, and the Queen was crying, "Faster! Faster!" But Alice felt she could not go faster, though she was too out of breath to say so. Here's the chessboard. The curious thing was that the trees and the other things around them never changed places at all. No matter how fast they ran, they never seemed to pass anything. "I wonder if the things move along with us," thought poor, puzzled Alice. The Queen seemed to read her mind, for she cried, "Faster! Don't try to talk." "Are we nearly there?" Alice managed to pant out at last. "Nearly there," the Queen repeated. "Why, we passed it 10 minutes ago. Faster!" And they skimmed through the air for a time in silence, with the wind whistling in Alice's ears and almost blowing her hair off her head. So she thought. Then suddenly, just as Alice was getting quite exhausted, they stopped, and she found herself sitting on the ground, breathless and giddy. The Queen popped her up against a tree and said, "You may rest a little now." Alice looked around her in great surprise. "Why, I do believe we've been under this tree the whole time. Everything's just as it was." "Of course it is," said the Queen. "Why wouldn't it be?" There we go. "Well, in our country," said Alice, still panting a little, "you'd get somewhere else if you ran very, very fast for a long time, as we've been doing." "A slow sort of country," said the Queen. "Now, here it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that. I'd rather not try, please, said Alice. I'm quite content to stay here, only I am so hot and thirsty. I know what you'd like, the Queen said. She took a little box out of her pocket. Have a biscuit? Alice thought it would not be good manners to say no, though it wasn't at all what she wanted. So she took it and ate it. It was very dry, and she thought she might choke trying to swallow it down with nothing to drink. While you're refreshing yourself, said the Queen, I'll just take the measurements. She took a ribbon out of her pocket, marked it in inches, and began measuring the ground and sticking little pegs in here and there. At the end of the 2 yards, the Queen said, putting a peg in the ground, I shall give you your directions. Have another biscuit? No, thank you. One is quite enough, said Alice. Thirst quenched, I hope, said the Queen. Alice wasn't sure how to reply, but the Queen didn't wait for her answer and kept on speaking. Now, at the end of 3 yards, I shall repeat the directions in case you forgot them. At the end of 4 yards, I shall say goodbye, and at the end of 5, I shall go. When she had finished placing all the pegs in the ground, she returned to the tree and slowly began walking back down the row. Alice was very interested in seeing what she would do. At the 2-yard peg, she turned around and said, a pawn can move 2 squares in its first move, you know. So you'll go very quickly through the 3rd square. By railway, I think. You'll find yourself in the 4th square in no time. Well, that square belongs to Tweedledum and Tweedledee. The 5th is mostly water. The 6th belongs to Humpty Dumpty. The Queen paused. Why have you said nothing? I didn't know I had to, Alice said. You should have said, it's extremely kind to tell you all of this. However, we'll suppose you did. The 7th square is all forest. However, one of the knights will show you the way. And in the 8th square, we shall be queens together, and it's all feasting and fun. Alice got up and curtsied and sat down again. At the next peg, the Queen turned again and said, speak in French when you can't think of English for the thing. Turn out your toes as you walk, and remember who you are. Then she walked to the next peg, said, goodbye, and hurried on to the last peg. How it happened, Alice never knew. But just as the Red Queen came to the last peg, she was gone. And Alice remembered that she was a pawn, and that it would soon be time for her to make her first move. Okay, chapter 3 is next. Looking Glass Insects. See you next time.